The conference room crackled with tension. 15 architects in $1,000 suits stared at their hands like guilty children. CEO Margaret Chen's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "Bring me the real architect." Her small fist slammed the mahogany table. "Not these. Consultants." The presentation screen blazed behind her. Richmond Bridge blueprints, the project that had stumped every expert for months. Silence stretched, heavy, suffocating. No one moved, no one breathed. Then, from the back corner where he'd been invisible for 3 years, the janitor's weathered hand slowly rose into the air. Connor Walsh, single father, night custodian, keeper of industrial mops and forgotten dreams. The room froze. 15 powerful men turned to stone, but none of them knew that from the hallway's shadows, a figure in a designer coat stood frozen, manicured fingers pressed against trembling lips, tears streaming down a face that had forgotten how to cry. The melody continued to float through the classroom as Ava's whispered words hung in the morning air. "Swan, like Mommy sang." Her voice was barely audible, fragile as spun glass, yet it carried the weight of 60 days of silence. Zoe's eyes widened with wonder, her small hands still gently holding her newfound friend. Tom felt his heart skip a beat, knowing he had just witnessed something miraculous. The little girl who had retreated into complete silence was finally speaking. "Ava talked!" Zoe exclaimed in an excited whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter this precious moment. "She talked, Daddy. Did you hear? She knows about swans too." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for the first time in 2 months, Ava's lips curved into the faintest smile. Tom knelt down beside both girls, his work-roughened hands gentle as he wound the music box again. "This was my wife's favorite song," he said softly, watching Ava's reaction carefully. The little girl nodded solemnly, understanding somehow that this was sacred territory. From the hallway, the woman in expensive clothes pressed herself against the wall, fighting to steady her breathing. Dr. Helen Sterling had watched her daughter's world collapse 2 months ago when the custody threats began. She had seen Ava withdraw into protective silence, refusing to speak even to her own mother. The best child psychologists in Portland had tried everything: play therapy, art therapy, even medication consultations. Nothing had worked. Now this gentle janitor with his simple music box had achieved what teams of specialists could not. Helen's vision blurred as she watched Tom carefully show Ava how the tiny mechanism worked inside the music box. His patience was extraordinary, the way he waited for her responses, never pushing or demanding. "See these little pins?" he was saying, pointing to the delicate metal teeth. "Each one plays a different note when the cylinder turns. My wife Anna made this one special, just for children who needed something beautiful to hold on to." Helen pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed by the tenderness in this stranger's voice. Tom Rivers understood loss in ways most people never would. 18 months ago, cancer had stolen Anna from their small family with brutal efficiency. The diagnosis had come in spring, and she was gone before the leaves turned. Those final months had been a masterclass in grace under pressure, with Anna continuing to craft music boxes for sick children, even as her own strength failed. "Promise me," she had whispered during those last terrible days. "Promise you'll keep making them. Children need beauty when everything else feels broken." He had traded his carpenter's tools for a janitor's mop, not out of defeat, but out of necessity. The flexible schedule allowed him to be present for Zoe's morning drop-offs and afternoon pickups, to volunteer at school events, to maintain the illusion of stability while his own world felt permanently off balance. The work felt like penance sometimes, cleaning up after others instead of building beautiful things. But Anna's voice whispered in his ear during the hardest moments. "There's dignity in all honest work, Tom, and someone has to care for the places where children learn." Zoe possessed an almost supernatural ability to sense sadness in others, a skill born from her own intimate acquaintance with loss. She had been barely 5 when Anna died, old enough to understand that Mommy wasn't coming back, but too young to comprehend the permanence of death. From the moment 7-year-old Ava Sterling had transferred from Portland, Zoe had appointed herself as the silent girl's guardian angel. "She looks like I felt," Zoe had explained to Tom after that first day. "Like she's waiting for someone to come back." "Daddy, Ava doesn't have any friends," she had announced, with the matter-of-fact certainty that only children possess. "I'm going to be her friend." Tom had watched with pride and growing concern as his daughter shared lunches, taught wordless hand games, and created an invisible shield of protection around this mysterious new student. Ava communicated only through haunting drawings of caged birds, their wings pressed against invisible barriers with increasing desperation. The art teacher had quietly shown Tom some of these drawings, worry evident in her eyes. But something was changing in the careful ecosystem Zoe had created. Tom noticed how Ava's rigid posture softened during their interactions, how genuine smiles crept across her face when she thought no one was watching. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, like watching a flower slowly turn toward sunlight. "She likes you, Daddy," Zoe had observed with 6-year-old wisdom. "She draws you sometimes. You and your cart and the music box. She draws you being nice." The mysterious woman in the hallway had become a fixture of Tom's peripheral awareness over recent weeks. Dr. Helen Sterling arrived early for pickups, always maintaining careful distance while observing her daughter's interactions with laser focus. Tom had noticed her expensive clothes that couldn't hide her hollow-eyed exhaustion, the way she gripped her car keys like a lifeline. Something about her careful invisibility spoke of desperation, barely held in check. She watched Ava with the intensity of someone memorizing precious moments. Helen had been studying this janitor and his daughter for weeks, noting every small interaction with the methodical precision of her medical training. She had observed from parking lots and shadowed hallways, documenting the way her daughter rediscovered laughter in stolen moments with the Rivers family. The irony wasn't lost on her. She could afford the best care money could buy, yet a widowed janitor had achieved what her wealth and connections could not. Tom Rivers had somehow created a pocket of safety that Helen's medical degrees and bank accounts couldn't replicate. During one particularly difficult evening, Helen had called her ex-husband Marcus in desperation. "She's not speaking, Marcus. Not even to me. The doctors say it could be permanent if we don't find the right approach." His response had been predictably clinical. "Then we need to consider alternative arrangements. A child with selective mutism requires specialized care, Helen. Care you may not be equipped to provide given your situation." The word situation had hung between them like a loaded weapon, heavy with implications about her diagnosis and deteriorating health. Something shifted this following week when both families began intersecting more naturally. Ava started staying after school more frequently, and Helen found herself arriving earlier, extending these precious moments where her daughter remembered how to be a child. She would park across the street and watch through classroom windows as Tom worked around the girls, never hurrying them, never making them feel like burdens. His gentleness was remarkable, the way he included both children in simple tasks, turning mundane cleaning duties into opportunities for connection. During one rainy afternoon when pickup was delayed, Helen had witnessed something that made her breath catch. Both girls had fallen asleep in the reading corner, Zoe's arm protectively draped over Ava's shoulder like a guardian angel. Tom had quietly covered them with his own jacket while continuing his work, humming Anna's swan song so softly Helen had to strain to hear it. He moved around them like they were precious artifacts, adjusting the temperature, dimming harsh fluorescent lights. Helen felt something crack open in her chest, watching this display of unconditional acceptance. "Mr. Rivers." Helen's voice was barely above a whisper when she finally approached him that evening, her usual composure cracking under the weight of gratitude and desperation. The polished facade she maintained for the world had slipped, revealing exhaustion etched around intelligent eyes that had seen too much suffering. "Thank you for being so kind to Ava. She hasn't been herself lately." The understatement felt massive, encompassing months of worry and sleepless nights watching her daughter disappear into silence. Tom looked up from organizing his supplies, noting the careful way this woman held herself, as if afraid any sudden movement might shatter her composure completely. Despite her obvious privilege, the designer clothes, the luxury car, the bearing of someone accustomed to deference, there was something fundamentally broken about her that spoke to his own experience with grief. "Zoe enjoys having a friend," he replied simply, his voice carrying the gentleness that had become his default setting since Anna's death. "Kids understand each other in ways adults sometimes forget." "Your daughter is remarkable," Helen continued, her voice strengthening slightly. "She treats Ava like she's not broken. Do you know how rare that is?" Tom did know, actually. He had seen the way other children stared at Ava's silence, how adults spoke about her in whispered conferences as if she couldn't hear every word. "Zoe knows what it feels like to have your world change overnight," he said quietly. "Maybe that's why she recognizes it in others." Their first real conversation happened by accident when Zoe came down with fever and Tom had to bring her to work. The school nurse was away, and Tom faced the impossible choice between leaving his sick daughter at home or risking his job. Helen had appeared like an answer to prayer, offering to let Ava stay and help care for Zoe. "I'm a doctor," she had said simply when Tom hesitated. "Pediatrics. I can handle a fever." The relief in his eyes had been so profound that Helen felt her own throat tighten with unexpected emotion. The three of them had ended up in the school kitchen, making simple chicken soup, while Ava hummed softly for the first time in months. Tom watched in amazement as Helen guided Ava through stirring the pot, her medical precision transforming into motherly patience. "Gentle circles, sweetheart. The bubbles tell us it's working." Ava nodded seriously, completely absorbed in her task. For the first time since arriving in Riverside, she looked like a normal child, engaged in a normal activity with people who cared about her. "She's been through so much," Helen murmured, while they waited for the soup to simmer, watching Ava carefully taste the broth with a small spoon. "The divorce, my diagnosis, the custody threats. Sometimes I think children are more resilient than adults, and sometimes I think they're infinitely more fragile." Tom understood completely. He had watched Zoe navigate grief with a combination of wisdom and vulnerability that broke his heart daily. "Maybe resilience isn't about being unbreakable," he offered. "Maybe it's about having safe people to fall apart with." These small moments began weaving themselves into something larger and more precious than either adult dared acknowledge. Weekend trips to the local park became natural occurrences, with both girls playing while Tom and Helen discovered they shared more than single parenthood. They talked about the impossible balance of protecting children while preparing them for harsh realities, about the guilt that came with not being enough despite trying everything. Helen learned about Anna's battle with cancer, about Tom's struggle to balance grief with hope for Zoe's future. Tom learned about Helen's mysterious condition, carefully spoken around in euphemisms that gradually revealed themselves as lymphoma. Stage 3. Prognosis uncertain. He learned about the recent upheaval that had brought them to Riverside, about Marcus's sudden interest in custody after months of absence. Neither pressed for details they weren't ready to share, understanding that some stories revealed themselves in their own time. What mattered was the way Ava's laughter had returned, bright and uninhibited, filling spaces that had been silent for too long. "Do you think she'll be okay?" Helen asked one Saturday afternoon, watching both girls building elaborate sandcastles with the focused determination that only children could muster. The question carried layers of meaning. Would Ava recover from the trauma? Would she survive what was coming? Would she remember these moments when everything changed again? Tom followed her gaze, noting how Zoe automatically included Ava in every decision, how Ava's responses were growing stronger and more confident each week. "I think she's stronger than anyone realizes," he said honestly, including herself. Children have this amazing ability to adapt when they feel safe. And she feels safe with Zoe, with us. The word us hung in the air between them, carrying implications neither was quite ready to examine. But the truth was undeniable. Somewhere along the way, their separate struggles had become shared hopes, their individual families blending into something unprecedented and precious. The happiness felt almost too fragile to trust, which perhaps explained Helen's increasingly tense phone calls. Tom noticed her stepping away to take certain calls, returning with worry lines deeper than before, and her hands shaking slightly as she reached for Ava. During one particularly heated conversation, he heard fragments that made his blood run cold. "She's my daughter, Marcus. Medical decisions are mine to make. You abandoned us when we needed you most." Ava began mentioning Daddy's new wife and something about a proper home, phrases that cast shadows over her newfound joy. The drawings changed too. Caged birds became more frequent, their wings pressed against barriers with increasing desperation. Sometimes she drew herself as a small bird being pulled in different directions by larger ones, the paper torn from the force of her coloring. Something was threatening their carefully constructed piece, and Tom found himself lying awake, wondering how long this borrowed happiness could last. The storm arrived disguised as Zoe's innocent discovery during a playdate at Helen's house. Using the bathroom, Zoe had accidentally knocked over a pill organizer, scattering medication across the bathroom floor. Being a helpful child, she had tried to put them back, reading labels aloud as she worked. "Oncology, pediatric palliative care." The words meant nothing to a 6-year-old, but everything to Tom when she repeated them at home with careful pronunciation. "Is Ava's mommy sick like my mommy was?" Zoe asked with the brutal honesty that only children possessed, her small face scrunched with concern. The question hit Tom like a physical blow, suddenly explaining so many things. Helen's pallor, her long sleeves in warm weather, her desperate attempts to create perfect moments with Ava. The careful way she held herself, as if afraid any sudden movement might accelerate something terrible already in motion. That evening, Tom's research painted a devastating picture that explained everything and changed nothing. Dr. Helen Sterling, renowned pediatric oncologist at Oregon Health Sciences University, had been diagnosed with aggressive lymphoma 8 months ago. The medical journals painted a grim picture. This particular strain responded poorly to treatment, with median survival rates measured in months rather than years. Articles revealed her decision to decline experimental treatment protocols in favor of quality time with her daughter. But it was the deeper digging that left Tom reeling with a mixture of betrayal and understanding. Helen had specifically researched Riverside Elementary, had found articles about Tom's volunteer work with grieving children after Anna's death. Their meeting hadn't been coincidence or fate. It had been carefully orchestrated by a dying mother, desperate to secure her daughter's future. Every moment, every shared laugh, every growing feeling between them had been built on calculated planning rather than natural connection. The realization felt like betrayal and salvation simultaneously. Tom understood the desperation that would drive a mother to such lengths. But the manipulation cut deep. Had any of it been real? Did Helen care for him as a person, or was he simply the most suitable candidate for surrogate fatherhood? The questions tormented him through a sleepless night while Zoe slept peacefully, unaware that her newfound happiness might be built on strategic deception. The confrontation came the next afternoon, heavy with unspoken truths hanging between them like storm clouds. Tom waited until both girls were occupied with art projects before approaching Helen directly. "You researched me before moving here," he stated quietly, watching color drain from her composed face. It wasn't a question. He had found cached pages from her browser history, articles about local elementary schools and their staff, background checks that painted him as the perfect widowed father figure. Helen's carefully maintained facade cracked like ice under pressure. "Tom, I can explain," she began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "Did any of it matter? Our conversations, the connection between the girls, whatever this is between us?" His voice carried pain rather than anger, which somehow made it worse. Helen felt tears threatening to spill as she realized how her careful planning must look to this genuinely good man who had opened his heart without reservation. "Everything mattered," she whispered, her composure finally shattered completely. "Every moment, every conversation, every time you made Ava smile, it all mattered more than you can possibly know. Yes, I researched you. Yes, I chose Riverside specifically because of you and Zoe, but that doesn't make my feelings less real or Ava's happiness less genuine." Her voice broke on the last words, months of carefully controlled emotion finally breaking free. The truth poured out like water through a broken dam. She spoke of Ava's father, Dr. Marcus Sterling, who had filed for divorce the week after her diagnosis and disappeared from their lives with surgical precision. She revealed the threatening legal documents that arrived monthly, photographs Marcus had somehow obtained of Ava at Tom's house, testimony from Portland neighbors about her episodes during aggressive treatment cycles. "I thought if Ava had foundation, someone who understood grief and loss, maybe she could survive losing me," Helen sobbed. "But I've made everything worse, haven't I?" She continued, reading the confusion and hurt in Tom's eyes. "I've given Marcus exactly what he needs to take her away. Evidence of my poor judgment, inappropriate relationships, unstable living situations. I tried to save her, and instead I've handed him the ammunition to destroy what little time we have left." The irony was devastating. Her attempts to secure Ava's future were being twisted into proof of her unfitness as a mother. Tom felt his anger dissolving into something more complex as he watched this brilliant, accomplished woman fall apart before his eyes. The manipulation stung, but the desperation behind it was heartbreakingly familiar. He had made his own desperate choices after Anna's death, some of them questionable in hindsight. "How long do you have?" he asked quietly, the question that hung over everything else they might say or do. Optimistically, 8 to 12 months? Realistically? Helen shrugged with the casual gesture of someone who had accepted the unacceptable. "I declined the experimental protocols. They might have bought me more time, but the side effects. I couldn't put Ava through watching me disappear piece by piece. I'd rather have 6 good months than 18 terrible ones." The practical way she discussed her own death made Tom's chest tight with admiration and sorrow. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of someone who changed everything instantly. The school's front doors opened with bureaucratic authority, and a tall man in an expensive suit strode through the hallways with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way. Dr. Marcus Sterling had arrived unannounced, his presence immediately charging the atmosphere with tension and barely concealed hostility. "Helen," he said coolly, ignoring Tom completely as he approached. "I see you're still involving Ava in inappropriate situations." His gaze swept over Tom's janitor uniform with obvious disdain before returning to his ex-wife with clinical detachment. "We need to discuss the custody arrangements. The temporary order came through this morning." Helen's face went white as he handed her official documents with the casual efficiency of someone serving an eviction notice. "Mr. Rivers, I presume?" Marcus finally acknowledged Tom's presence with the tone one might use for particularly persistent pest. "I'm Dr. Marcus Sterling, Ava's father. I understand you've been spending considerable time with my family." The way he emphasized "my family" made it clear that Tom's involvement was both unwelcome and temporary. His presence filled the small space with an authority that Tom's gentle nature couldn't match. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in psychological warfare, with Marcus methodically dismantling Tom's sense of adequacy without ever raising his voice. He spoke casually of private schools and trust funds, of cultural opportunities and medical advantages that a janitor's salary could never provide. Ava has specific needs that require specialized attention, he explained with professional detachment. Given Helen's deteriorating condition, it's crucial that we establish proper stability before— He let the sentence hang, the implication clear. Before I die. Helen finished bitterly. You can say the word, Marcus. We both know why you're here. Her ex-husband's expression remained unchanged, as if discussing weekend plans rather than a child's future after maternal death. I'm here because our daughter deserves better than this. He gestured vaguely around the modest school setting. Better than emotional experiments from a sick woman and her— He paused, looking at Tom with obvious distaste. Tom felt the familiar sting of class warfare, the assumption that love and dedication meant nothing without an impressive bank balance. Ava seems happy here, he said quietly, refusing to rise to the bait. She's speaking again, engaging with other children, showing signs of recovery from whatever trauma brought her here in the first place. Marcus's laugh was cold and clinical, the sound of someone who had never doubted his own superiority. Recovery? Mr. Rivers, do you have any idea what Ava has been through, the chaos Helen's illness has created in that child's life? Marcus pulled out a tablet, swiping through what appeared to be medical reports and psychological evaluations. Selective mutism, anxiety disorders, attachment issues. These require professional intervention, not amateur hour with a janitor and his daughter. Each word was calculated to wound, delivered with the precision of someone who had spent years perfecting the art of subtle cruelty. The custody order felt like a death sentence when Tom read it that evening. Ava would go with Marcus pending a full hearing the following week, supervised visitation for Helen until her condition deteriorates further. The language was clinical, reducing a mother's love to medical terminology and prognosis charts. Helen could see her daughter for 2 hours every other day in the presence of a court-appointed supervisor who would document every interaction for potential use in final custody determination. This is what's best for Ava, Marcus had repeated like a mantra as he served the papers, as if saying it enough times would make abandoning a sick mother seem reasonable. She needs stability, structure, a 2-parent household that can provide for her future. Not this. He gestured dismissively at the modest school setting where his daughter had finally found her voice again. Tom watched the light leave Ava's eyes as the news sank in, watched Zoe's fierce protests fall on deaf ears as if she were speaking a language adults couldn't understand. "You can't take Ava," Zoe had shouted with 6-year-old indignation. "She's my sister. She belongs here with us." Her passion was heartbreaking in its futility, a child's pure love meeting the cold machinery of legal proceedings. The separation was brutal in its bureaucratic efficiency. Marcus arrived Wednesday evening with legal documents and a social worker who introduced herself with professional sympathy that couldn't mask the awkwardness of her role. His new wife waited in an expensive car outside, checking her phone with the impatience of someone collecting an inconvenient package. The contrast between her obvious discomfort and Tom's genuine engagement with both children wasn't lost on anyone present. Ava's goodbye to Zoe was heartbreaking in its desperate intensity. 2 little girls clinging to each other as if their love alone could stop the machinery of adult decisions. "I promise to always remember, you're my sister," Ava whispered through tears that wouldn't stop falling, her voice stronger than it had been in months, but breaking with emotion. "I promise to wait for you to come back," Zoe replied, her small body shaking with sobs that seemed too big for her tiny frame. "Girls, we really need to go," the social worker said gently, hating her role but bound by professional duty. "Ava, your father is waiting, and we have a schedule to keep." The clinical language felt obscene in the face of such raw emotion, reducing a child's trauma to appointment slots and transportation arrangements. Helen knelt beside her daughter, memorizing her face as if this might be the last time she could hold her freely. "Remember that Mommy loves you more than all the stars in the sky," Helen whispered, using their private phrase that had comforted Ava through countless bedtimes. "And remember that Zoe and Mr. Tom love you too. That love doesn't go away, even when people have to be apart for a while." She pressed something small into Ava's hand, a tiny swan charm that had belonged to Helen's own mother, a tangible reminder of connection across whatever distance might come. Helen's condition deteriorated rapidly under the stress, landing her in the hospital just days before the custody hearing. The combination of emotional trauma and physical disease created a perfect storm that her weakened system couldn't handle. Tom found himself juggling hospital visits with caring for a traumatized Zoe, while navigating the complex legal system with Helen's overwhelmed public defender. The lawyer was kind, but clearly outmatched by Marcus's expensive legal team. "I'll be honest with you, Mr. Rivers," the public defender said during their brief consultation. "This is an uphill battle. Dr. Sterling has resources, stability, and a compelling case for what's in the child's best interests. The court tends to favor two-parent households with financial security, especially when the custodial parent has a terminal diagnosis." The clinical assessment of their chances felt like receiving a medical diagnosis, accurate but devastating. Marcus used every advantage with surgical precision, painting Tom as an unstable influence and Helen as a delusional woman whose illness had compromised her judgment beyond repair. The photographs of Ava at Tom's house were entered as evidence of inappropriate exposure to unvetted male figures during a vulnerable period. Helen's brave choice to prioritize quality time over aggressive treatment was twisted into proof of maternal neglect and poor decision-making capacity. Dr. Sterling declined proven treatment protocols in favor of what she calls quality time, Marcus's lawyer argued with practiced efficiency. This decision demonstrates a pattern of putting her own emotional needs above her daughter's welfare. How can we trust her judgment regarding Ava's future when she has made such questionable choices about her own medical care? The logic was airtight and completely heartless. Yet sometimes the system surprises everyone involved, and Judge Maria Santos had built her reputation on prioritizing children's emotional welfare over financial considerations. She had seen too many cases where wealth and stability on paper masked emotional poverty and neglect in practice. When Ava was brought in for her private interview, the judge noted immediately how the child's demeanor changed when discussing different aspects of her life. "Tell me about school, Ava," Judge Santos said gently, her chambers arranged to feel more like a living room than a courtroom. "What do you like best about your days?" Ava's response was immediate and unguarded. "I like when Uncle Tom comes to clean our classroom because he always has time to listen. And I like when Zoe shows me how to play games that don't need words. They make me feel safe." When asked about her father, Ava's body language shifted noticeably, shoulders tensing, eye contact decreasing, responses becoming shorter and more guarded. "Daddy has a big house and lots of rules," she said carefully, as if reciting something she had been coached to say. "His new wife makes healthy snacks and schedules educational activities." The contrast between spontaneous warmth and rehearsed responses was stark enough to make the judge take additional notes. "If you could choose where to live, what would be most important to you?" Judge Santos asked, watching Ava's face carefully. The 7-year-old considered the question with the seriousness it deserved, before answering with devastating simplicity. "I want to be with people who love me, even when I'm sad, or scared, or don't talk. I want to be with Mommy and Zoe and Daddy Tom because they make me feel like I belong." Her words carried more weight than any legal argument, the voice of a child who had found healing in the most unexpected place. "They are my real family," she continued, using the title for Tom that had emerged naturally over their months together. "Daddy Marcus has money and rules, but Daddy Tom has hugs and patience. I need hugs more than money right now." The community rallied in ways that surprised everyone, especially Marcus and his legal team. Teachers testified about Ava's transformation from silent and withdrawn to engaged and participatory, providing documentation of her academic and social progress since forming connections with the Rivers family. Mrs. Patterson, the school principal, presented attendance records showing that Ava had gone from frequent absences to perfect attendance once Tom began his informal mentorship. Neighbors spoke of the gentleman who had quietly helped with yard work and small repairs throughout the community, never asking for anything in return, but always available when help was needed. "Tom Rivers is the kind of neighbor everyone wishes they had," testified Mrs. Chen from down the street. "He shows up when you need him, whether it's fixing a leaky faucet or just listening when times are hard. If Ava needs that kind of steady presence in her life, she couldn't do better." Even Dr. Martinez, Helen's oncologist, testified via video conference about her stable condition and continued capacity for parenting with appropriate support systems in place. Dr. Sterling's prognosis allows for months of quality engagement with her daughter, he stated professionally. Her decision to prioritize time over aggressive treatment is medically sound given her specific diagnosis. She remains fully competent to make decisions regarding her child's welfare. The testimony that surprised everyone came from an unexpected source, Ava herself. Against standard practice, Judge Santos allowed the 7-year-old to address the court directly, sensing that this particular child had something important to say. Ava stood at the witness stand, barely tall enough to see over it, and spoke with a clarity that silenced the entire courtroom. "I know my mummy is sick," she said, her voice steady, despite the magnitude of the moment. "I know she might go to heaven like Zoe's mummy did, but that doesn't mean she stopped being a good mummy. She reads to me every night and makes my favorite pancakes and holds me when I have nightmares about being taken away. Daddy Marcus never held me when I was scared. He said crying was for babies." The courtroom remained absolutely silent as Ava continued, her small voice carrying across the space with unexpected power. "Uncle Tom teaches me that it's okay to be sad sometimes, and Zoe shows me that friends can become family. When I'm with them, I remember how to use my voice. When I'm with Daddy Marcus, I forget how to breathe." The honesty was devastating in its simplicity, cutting through legal arguments to the heart of what childhood actually required. Judge Santos delivered her verdict with the wisdom of someone who understood that families come in many forms, and love couldn't be measured in bank account statements. "Custody remains with Dr. Helen Sterling," she announced, her voice cutting through Marcus's confident facade like a blade through silk. "Mr. Sterling will receive liberal visitation rights consistent with his daughter's emotional well-being. However, given Dr. Sterling's prognosis, the court appoints Tom Rivers as designated guardian upon her passing." The gavel's bang echoed like a bell of freedom through the courtroom, and Tom felt the weight of unexpected responsibility settle on his shoulders alongside overwhelming relief. Ava's smile was radiant as she ran to hug first Helen, then Tom, and finally Zoe, who had been waiting in the hallway with barely contained anxiety. "We stay together," Ava whispered, and for the first time in months, the future felt possible rather than terrifying. This court recognizes that family is not always defined by biology, but by commitment to a child's welfare, Judge Santos continued, looking directly at Marcus, whose confidence had evaporated completely. "The evidence shows clearly that Ava has thrived in the care and community that Mr. Rivers and his daughter have provided. Disrupting those bonds would serve no one's interests except perhaps wounded pride." The months that followed were precious beyond measure, each day a gift wrapped in the ordinary moments that make up a life well lived. Helen threw herself into creating memories rather than fighting her illness, recording bedtime stories for future nights when her voice would be only a whisper in Ava's memory. She wrote letters for birthdays and graduations, first days of school and wedding days, trying to be present for a future she wouldn't see. Tom learned about Ava's favorite foods and secret fears, about the songs that calmed her nightmares, and the activities that brought her joy. He discovered her talent for mathematics and her fear of thunderstorms, her love of strawberry ice cream, and her habit of talking to photographs when she missed someone. Each revelation felt like a privilege, building the foundation of understanding that would carry them through the challenges ahead. Zoe reveled in having a sister, teaching Ava playground politics and sharing every small triumph with the generous spirit that had first drawn them together. She appointed herself as Ava's guide to their school's social ecosystem, introducing her to friendly teachers and helping her navigate the unspoken rules of cafeteria seating and recess alliances. "Sisters stick together," became her motto, applied with 6-year-old certainty to everything from sharing desserts to defending against playground bullies. The four of them became something unprecedented, a family born from loss but sustained by conscious choice. Sunday mornings meant pancakes and music box concerts, with both girls learning to wind the delicate mechanisms while Tom told stories about Anna's craftsmanship. Evenings brought homework help and bedtime stories, with Helen and Tom tag-teaming the complex emotional needs of two children who had experienced too much loss for their young years. Helen's passing came peacefully on a snow-quiet February morning, with Tom and both girls beside her hospital bed holding vigil through the night. Her last words were practical instructions about Ava's asthma inhaler, mixed with expressions of gratitude that seemed inadequate for the magnitude of what Tom had accepted. "Thank you for loving her like she's yours," she whispered, her hand squeezing his with surprising strength. "Thank you for making her voice matter." The grief was real and deep, but it was grief held within the safety of love, processed by hearts that had learned to weather loss together. Ava spoke at the small funeral service, her voice clear and strong, as she thanked her mother for giving me the best family in the whole world, and for teaching me that love doesn't end when people go to heaven. The tears came freely, but they were tears of gratitude as much as sorrow. The legal adoption was finalized 6 months later, a formality that simply made official what had already become true in every way that mattered. Marcus made his required appearances for court-mandated visitation, but the stilted interactions only highlighted the contrast between obligation and genuine connection. Ava was polite but distant with her biological father, saving her real smiles and spontaneous affection for the family she had chosen. Tom and the girls had moved into a larger house by then, one with a workshop where he could teach them woodworking and space for Helen's medical books that Ava liked to flip through, remembering her mother's brilliant mind. The garage became a community gathering place where neighborhood children came to learn about patience and precision, about turning broken things into objects of beauty through careful attention and love. 2 years later, Tom Rivers looked up from his workbench to see both girls helping neighborhood children with their own music box projects. The small workshop had evolved into something larger, a place where broken things became beautiful, where children learned that healing happened through creation rather than just conversation. Ava, now 9, had found her voice in every sense, speaking with confidence while retaining the thoughtful quiet that made her special. Zoe, 8 and fierce with protective love, had learned that families could grow in unexpected ways without diminishing what came before. She still spoke to Anna's photograph each night, sharing details about their expanded family with the certainty that love transcended physical presence. "Mommy Anna would like Ava," she told Tom one evening with matter-of-fact confidence. "They both make sad things beautiful." The original music box sat in a place of honor on the living room shelf, wound each evening as part of their bedtime routine that had become sacred ritual. The swan's melody still floated through their home, but now it was joined by the sounds of 2 children who had learned to harmonize their distinct voices into something entirely their own. Sometimes Tom caught echoes of Anna's laughter in their play, and Helen's gentle wisdom in their problem-solving. Interviews, meetings, Technical consultations and public appearances filled days that had once been measured in square footage, mopped, and toilets scrubbed. The complexity was overwhelming, demanding, and absolutely necessary for the kind of institutional change that might prevent future tragedies. But looking at the bridge's bones rising from morning mist like a cathedral of steel and possibility, seeing the potential for beauty restored and safety assured through honest materials and transparent process, Connor felt something he'd thought lost forever in the wreckage of personal tragedy and professional failure. Hope. Not the naive optimism of his younger self, who'd believed architecture could change the world through individual vision alone, but the mature understanding that change required both personal commitment and institutional support, working together toward common goals that transcended quarterly reports and political convenience. The bridge would be rebuilt properly this time, with materials that matched its designer's vision and safety margins that could withstand both ice storms and human error. No regrets, Connor said, meaning it with the conviction of someone who'd walked through fire and emerged with understanding that some things were worth saving even when they broke your heart in the process of salvation. The words carried across morning air toward workers who waved respectfully, men and women who knew the bridge's history and understood they were participating in something larger than simple construction project. They were correcting institutional failure, implementing transparency, and building monument not to perfection, but to the possibility of making things right through honest work and public accountability. The responsibility was enormous, the scrutiny intense, but Connor had learned something in his years of invisible service that equipped him for visible leadership. Sometimes the most important building happened not in drafting rooms or executive suites, but in the quiet moments when someone chose to pick up their tools and begin again with full knowledge of what failure cost and what success required. The bridge would stand as testimony not just to architectural vision, but to the possibility of institutional change, personal redemption, and the remarkable fact that sometimes the person you're looking for has been there all along, waiting for the right moment to raise their hand and change everything through individual courage and collective commitment to something larger than self-interest or corporate convenience. As the sun climbed higher, painting the river with light that seemed to promise better days ahead, Connor Walsh raised his coffee cup in a silent toast to second chances, hard-won wisdom, and the miraculous possibility that broken things could be rebuilt stronger through honest materials, transparent process, and the kind of love that refuses to accept that failure is permanent or that ghosts can't be resurrected through commitment to excellence over expedience. The work ahead would be demanding, but for the first time in 15 years, demanding felt like privilege rather than burden, opportunity rather than obligation. The architect had returned, and the bridge would live again.